You are listening to the
World Extreme.
World Extreme Medicine.
The World Extreme Medicine
Podcast.
Hello and welcome to World Extreme Medicine Podcast. I'm Marcus Stevens, a UK-based GP, and this week we're joined by Gemma van Huyssteen, a surfing and diving doctor from Cape Town. But welcome to the podcast, Gemma.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So it's been a while to get this booked in, partly because you travel a lot and I'm often away. But I think it's probably been a year or so before we were first put in touch. And you wrote in with an idea for a guest for the podcast and gave us a little hint in your email of what you've been up to for the last 9 months or so. And I thought we ought to hear a bit more from you.
Sure. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be able to talk to you. And as you said, it's taken quite a while for us to actually match up. So thanks for taking the time and the patience. Yeah. So when I sent you that email, I actually was on the SA Gullis 2, which is a research and science vessel. And we were in the South Atlantic traveling to Tristan da Cunha and Gough Island. And I happened to hear one of the podcasts, and somebody was talking about a doctor who'd worked on Tristan da Cunha, and they were wishing that they could get in contact with them. And I was almost certain that it must have been the Dutch doctor that I had met. So that was why I made the initial contact. And yeah, now here we are today. Yeah.
Brilliant. So we'll certainly get to hearing more about your work on ships and some of the other stuff you're up to that year. But if we go back to a bit early in your career and look at medical school, was this always the plan, kind of travel, dive medicine? What were things like earlier on in your career and how was medical school?
No, not at all. So unlike some other people who knew about the wilderness medicine world, it kind of hit me as a surprise, and it came something totally unexpected in my career. So in med school, I'll be honest, I almost failed first year chemistry. And that was because I was rock climbing too much. So yeah, I started rock climbing in first year, and that kind of took over my first 5 years of med school, and it became something I did almost every weekend, and it was a real dedication. I can distinctly remember trying to finish some chemistry online tutorials in a tent with rain coming down and very bad signal. So yeah, it was, I really enjoyed med school, but I only really started to imagine wilderness medicine possibilities long after, graduating and well into my training years.
And after you graduated, talk us through what you did then. So is it you have a year, a city year, should we call it, and then a community year? Is that roughly how it looks in South Africa?
Sort of. So we have 3 years of mandatory government service when we finish our degree. And basically you can apply and you can hope for certain positions, but it's totally not merit-based or interview-based. They just send you randomly wherever they think they need you. And so, yeah, I started my internship. So it's 2 years of internship and then 1 year of community service. But essentially, it is all a form of community service. And during that time, we work through all the major specialties for about 2 to 4 months at a time. And we work under supervision, and it's basically time to train us up and also gear us to pick a specialty of choice during that time. So I was very lucky, and I got posted to one of the best hospitals in the country called George Hospital. And that's in our garden route. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's a beautiful stretch of coastline between the Eastern Cape and Cape Town. And I had a really special experience there. I got to immerse myself in nature. I got super into hiking, started mountain biking. And yeah, that's actually where my love of surfing first began. There's a surf spot there called called Vic Bay. Yeah, Victoria Bay. And it's a right-hand point break. And yeah, that's basically where I first started in 2020. Yeah, so my internship year was, it's a very steep learning curve, extremely grueling, and really long hours, long shifts. So sort of that archaic shift cycle where interns are working for like 30 to 36 hours at a time. And a lot of that time is unsupervised. You have sort of someone senior not on premises. So it was a very difficult time, but I learned and grew a lot. And I'm grateful for it because it kind of set me up to be able to work in the EC emergency center settings in Cape Town. Yeah. So after my time at George Hospital, I moved to Cape Town, and my second posting was at a hospital called Mitchell's Plain. Mitchell's Plain district, and it's quite renowned for its trauma center. And they see a lot of interpersonal violence and a wide range of medicals as well because of the demographics. So a lot of ischemic stuff, but yeah, a little bit of everything. And then I moved from there after the first 6 months. I completed my second 6 months at a tiny little clinic that's called Guguletu Community Health Center, and that's in the heart of one of the townships. And there again, I spent most of my time in EC. They sort of kept trying to get someone else to EC because a lot of the doctors wanted to work in the clinics and just do sort of more regular GP stuff. And I loved EC, so I just got stuck in and spent another 6 months doing that there. Yeah, so that was kind of my government training years. And obviously, that was, so 2020 was when I moved to Cape Town, and that was pandemic, that was COVID time. So I never anticipated that that was how I would spend my time. But yeah, all potential wilderness stuff only started after that.
Nice. Mitchell's Plain certainly rings a bell. I remember lots of friends talking about it when they were planning electives and hoping
Sure.
and knowing that they then saw quite a lot of trauma. And then did you have a third community year after that?
No, so that was 2 years at George and then 1 year at Mitchell's Plain and Guguletu.
Fine. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I said having lucky enough to work with quite a lot of South African doctors when I worked in West Africa, and heard lots of tales of just how full on those internship, and especially that sort of often those remote postings can be with very little supervision, and yeah, certainly makes some of our NHS jobs look slightly cushy and well looked after. But I know that again, having worked with you guys, that you come out of it incredibly well skilled, especially in the kind of trauma and emergency world.
Thank you. I mean, I think without the teams that we have there and without the training, that's really what gears the young doctors to set themselves up. And I am so lucky to have had the seniors that I had there. They were absolutely incredible, the teams at both hospitals. And so I'm extremely grateful for that exposure.
Fantastic. And it set you up well for what sounds like a pretty interesting time to come. So how did you find yourself out of South Africa and diving and surfing in the wilderness?
So basically how it started was I actually hit a bit of a prolonged burnout period that I only picked up about 6 months late. So after that 2020 year, like so many of our colleagues during the COVID times, and I decided I planned to take 3 to 4 months off to scuba dive as much as possible. And that quickly became training to become a dive master. So I did my PADI dive master training the east coast of South Africa. So there's a beautiful dive site called Sodwana, and it's right on the border between Mozambique and our country. And yeah, I basically spent 2 months training there to become a dive master. And it was during that time where I started guiding for a guy called Eckhart Brunt. And he's a Namibian anesthetist. And he was one of the original guys who set up a clinic in the Mentawais in Indonesia, in a little surf resort called Macaroni's. So yeah, he took a liking to me, and he invited me to come and work there for him and his wife. And that was just the most incredible invitation. I didn't even know that these types of things existed. So I followed him up on it. And unfortunately, because of COVID, the local chief on the island had decided that he didn't want to have Western doctors come and visit anymore. And I think it was, in part to do with beliefs around COVID and where COVID had arisen from, and that they had possibly believed it was a Western illness. And, so they decided to just keep it within the Indonesian healthcare system. And now there's an Indonesian nurse who works there. So the opportunity kind of dropped off the map. And then I was just working in Cape Town and following up and sending emails and shooting in the dark until eventually Eckhart, I think he probably got annoyed with me, and he just sort of said, well, why don't you speak to the guys at G-Land? So he set me up with the guys there, and I spoke to the people who run the Surfing Doctors program. So I don't know if you've heard of them. They're a Surfing Doctors Association. And it's basically a collection of people who surf, who are also in the medical field. And you can join the association and sign up to go and join one of their systems. So they have got like a little system set up at G-Land in East Java in Indonesia. And then they've also got connections in Fiji, also in other parts like near Aceh in northern Sumatra. So yeah, that basically I started communicating with them, but we hadn't set anything up. And I landed up in Indonesia on a trip. So I just went on a 1 month trip at the time, little surf trip for myself. And whilst I was there, I managed to confirm that they needed a doctor at a place called Barefoot Conservation, which was up in basically north of Indonesia, so West Papua. So I don't know if you know much about that, but there's a very famous diving area called Raja Ampat. It's basically the north. So there's a little coral triangle that links Western Oz, the side of Northwest Australia to Indonesia. And Raja Ampat is the topmost tip of the coral triangle. And it's just absolutely spectacular coral reefs. So I joined a conservation and research diving program as their doctor on site. And yeah, I got to dive. I got to work as a dive master and a GP in between, with a little bit of a diving medicine thing on the side. And, it was absolutely wonderful working there. So yeah, I can walk you through sort of what that looked like. It's basically, we worked on an island called Arborek Island. And that was from an evacuation perspective, about a 2-hour rickety boat ride away from the nearest town called Waisai. And in Waisai, they have a little medical center and a hyperbaric chamber of sorts, which is not really in action anymore and no longer PADI certified, with no hyperbaric physician on premises. And then you're about 5 hours ferry ride away from Sorong, which is where they have sort of definitive hospitals. So yeah, that was kind of what happened. And it was a real shot in the dark, because I was already in Indonesia and I wasn't really sure. I didn't really have any final answers from the organizers. And I had to make a call about going up there and kind of waiting for a final answer, or sticking to Bali in the areas that I knew well. And basically, I just made a call and I decided to leave. I had to do a visa run to Malaysia anyway. So I went to Malaysia and then I flew over to Sorong. And interestingly, during that time, I actually got horrendously ill. I landed up in the hospital in Sorong with, some pyrexia of unknown origin that no one could really figure out what it was, some kind of tropical bug of some sort. But it wasn't COVID, it wasn't dengue, and I'm pretty convinced it was some kind of encephalitis that I had. But yeah, I spent about a week recovering, and then finally I was well enough to go over on the boats to the island and start my adventures there.
Fascinating, and I'm certainly aware of the surfing doctors for some time now. It's always been one of those sort of medical organizations I'd love to join, but I'm not sure my surfing's really up to it, or my surfing's non-existent, sadly. But maybe one day I'll give myself some extended time on the coast somewhere, and I can learn, and then finally join the most exclusive of medical associations. Well, it sounds like, a bit like all the best things in life come about a bit by chance, don't they? And sometimes you've just got to kind of keep emailing. And so it sounds like you're pretty remote. And how many people were you looking after, on the island, and what kind of did you have at your disposal? What did your clinic look like?
So it's a very small island. You can run the total circumference of the island in about 15 minutes. Total population of 200. And that's mostly West Papuans that have never ever left the island, and about 15 Westerners, so 15 Western staff, which is all kinds of researchers, scientists, dive masters, dive instructors, etc. So yeah, basically my job was twofold. So looking after the local population of people and anything that they might encounter, and then also taking care of the Western guests and crew that were there. So they would take groups of about 10 to 20 Westerners at a time, usually people from the UK, often people from other parts of Europe, and they would join the science programs. They join a science training program, and we take them underwater and walk them through learning about the underwater world, and also a lot of them would be doing their dive courses. So there was an enormous amount of risk, actually, with new divers in a remote setting. Our evacuation procedures were not they were definitely less than ideal. A lot of the time, the boats would not work. The boat motors would sort of take a while to get going. But yeah, it was a little bit of potential for a Swiss cheese type of system collapse. But luckily, we didn't have any major events while I was there. Sort of the medical infirmary that we had was we had about 2 or 3 big cargo boxes full of equipment. A lot of them were, out of date and slightly moldy from the very moist environment, but we did have bag masks and airway equipment. We did have oxygen, luckily because it was a dive site, a dive resort. And then we also had, quite a host of medications, mostly left by guests. So that was how we would restock mostly. People would bring their antibiotics and eardrops and things, and that's generally how we did the restock. Or once per week, I would go across on the rickety boat to Waisai and then pop in at the little clinics and try and scrounge for whatever things we might need and bring them back on the boat for the incoming guests the next week. Yeah, so it was quite unique in that way. But not actually that far from some of the, situations and circumstances that I have found myself in back home, interestingly.
Sounds, I've got pretty idyllic kind of picture in my head. Partly, I think, perhaps influenced by some of your fairly dreamy photos of these places I've seen on your social media. I think having seen there's various, you see various kind of wilderness medicine Instagram pages, don't you? Well, I certainly do, and then yours is certainly kind of the more idyllic end of the spectrum, suturing some big gash with a sort of beautiful coral reef background in the background. So that's what I've kind of got in my head. And what kind of things were you seeing? So obviously, was there much diving medicine to get involved with? What was the most common things? Anything, nothing too dramatic, but what was your day to day?
So luckily, we didn't have many diving related emergencies because we did stick to very strict dive limitations. Recreational dive limits. We kind of cherry picked the trainee divers for the tougher dive sites to try and limit risk. So the only one that I had was a potential monoarthritis as part of a barotrauma, but I discussed it with the dive medicine doctors at the time that I knew, and we'd all decided that it was unlikely to have been a bubble in a digit, a single bubble in a digit, and it was actually determined to just have been more likely an infection. So that was only sort of diving related thing, which was very minor. But we did actually had 2 patients that had suspected scorpions, fish stings or puncture wounds whilst I was there, and that was probably the biggest, most potential for life-threatening injury. So I can talk you through
scorpion fish.
Yeah, from scorpion fish.
Oh whoa! I've no idea what that is. Yeah, tell us more.
Okay, so scorpion fish is a highly camouflaged bottom-dwelling fish. They look quite grumpy. They're probably the grumpiest fish in the ocean, except for the stonefish, perhaps. And so close cousins of the stonefish, and they're often found in sort of rocky bedded seabeds, shallow areas, and they often hide underneath little outcrops. But their whole thing is that they're super camouflaged. So if you're walking in the shallows without booties on, it's quite a high risk in those environments that you might get a puncture from one of their dorsal spines. So yeah, they have 13 dorsal spines, and each one carries a certain amount of toxin. I think it varies, but on average, about 3 milligrams of toxin per spine. So it takes, from my reading, it takes about 18 milligrams of toxin to be that sort of like lethal doses ranges. Yeah. So yeah, basically they're a high risk a creature to come in contact with. Definitely one of the most dangerous in the ocean. And obviously, if someone has an injury, which is what happened with these guys, is there was a young girl and an older crew member each of them had been punctured on 2 different events. You don't know once they're walking the shallows and they come back with a puncture wound and an array of symptoms. You don't know if it's a stonefish, scorpionfish, a lionfish, or maybe even a stingray barb. So you kind of work your way through the differentials, and you've got to decide: is it necessary for them to be evacuated or not?
Well, I'll certainly be packing booties next time I head abroad to the sea. And what's the toxin? What does the toxin do? Is it systemically absorbed and like a neurotoxin, like certain snake bites, or is it more kind of local effects?
Yeah, so both the scorpion and the stonefish have got quite potent neurotoxins, and then slightly less potent hemotoxins as well. So it's a whole array of different toxins in their spines. And Yeah, the stonefish there are antidotes that have been designed specifically for stonefish venom, but for scorpionfish, you treat them supportively, and you observe them, and you watch for neurotoxic effects and seizures, and yeah. So there can be quite a wide range of clinical manifestations, and we haven't studied them adequately enough, really, because the number of cases that have been documented are really slim. It hardly ever happens, or perhaps because people have had untimely ends, it hasn't actually made it to the hospitals. So in these particular cases, the one was an 8-year-old child, and she had been playing in the shallows and fishing, and she came back having complained of being sort of stabbed by a long camouflaged fish that then swam away. And she had a localized reaction around the foot. So she had local inflammation with pain, a little bit of erythema. And then within about 2 hours, she was complaining of myalgia, she had muscle twitches, and sort of systemic neurological signs. So I was quite concerned about evacuating her. It was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And we knew that if we wanted to get her to YSI, we'd have to start soon because we were going to lose light because you're so close to the equator there that you really, the sun goes down like clockwork at about 6:15. So it was quite a challenge to get everybody involved in the community and try and get her dad, who happened to have been the chief of the village, to agree to send her to YSI for monitoring. But in the end, they actually decided that they weren't going to, and they were quite comfortable with having me there, which was a difficult ethical situation for me. And needless to say, I didn't sleep much that night.
Goodness, fascinating. I've never heard of that as scorpionfish as a risk. How widespread are they? Is it something that you saw that was quite isolated to this coral triangle and the kind of particular coral environment you were in, or are there scorpionfish everywhere waiting to catch us out?
So they're definitely not found in the colder waters, so you don't need to worry about them in the UK. It's they're endemic to warm waters and in particular the Indo-Pacific. So right through Southeast Asia, they're quite prevalent. I wondered because both of the patients that had punctures and injuries from them, whether it was scorpion or stonefish, we don't know, but both of them turned out to be okay without any real aggressive intervention. So a little bit of IV fluids, some NSAIDs, paracetamol, and then the most important thing is that they have heat labile toxins. So similarly to the stingrays, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, but they're heat labile. So you have to immerse the affected limb in hot water, and they say for at least 45 minutes. Yeah, so it's like 30 to 60 minutes immersion in 40 to 45 degree water.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so it is, yeah. So I kind of, it begs the question of whether how understudied are they? Is it the population that's understudied, and have they developed some kind of immunity to the toxin over time? Or is it that, there's variability within the fish themselves and the individuals carry different concentrations of toxin, or, it leads to a lot of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know what I'll be Googling once we finish up here. Fantastic. So you had 3 months at Barefoot Conservation, and with all sorts of, like I said, fascinating things to deal with, and sounds like you're kind of, although there was some similarities with some of your internship, your first real experience of providing care in pretty remote places. What did you move on to next? Did it terrify you off, or did you get the bug for a bit more wilderness settings?
No. Wow, I definitely got the bug, and I didn't want to leave after that. So I actually went down to Ahmed and did some free diving training. And whilst I was there, I managed to secure a position with the surfing doctors. And that was in East Java at a very famous surf camp called G-Land. There's a very famous wave there. It's a big, heavy left-hander that's pretty world renowned, and there's a lot of history there as well. So I immediately said yes, and I went to go and join the camp. We caught a little, I think it was about 3-hour boat ride over from Bali to East Java. And yeah, basically it's incredible because it's one of the places very close to Bali that is not over industrialized because it's a national park. So they've really kept it raw and original. And there are only 4 camps that are allowed there. If you want to put up any infrastructure, you have to get it passed by government. So you feel very much like you're in the Javanese jungle. There are monkeys running around, there are wild boar, there are incredible antelope that walk down into the beach and they sort of pick for things in the rock pools. And then there are also tigers. Well, they're not actually tigers, they're jaguars. Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, they're jaguars, but they're pretty big cats. And I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was just a rumor that they were still around, but I actually saw one whilst I was there. Yeah, crossing one of the estuaries. So that was pretty
Incredible.
spectacular. Yeah, yeah. And then 2 weeks after I left, I got a video of one of them coming into the camps and snatching a monkey right in front of some guests. So it's really wild out there.
Sounds it. I'm hoping we're not going to be discussing any jaguar bites.
No, definitely not.
But what was the setup there? So you said there was 4 camps. Was there, I'm sort of picturing lots of big wave surfers coming in for the swells, kind of who was coming and going and who were you looking after?
Yeah, so I was based at one of the camps called Jawa. So surfing doctors have got a relationship with them, but we were definitely, on call for anyone who happened to have any kind of surf-related trauma or just traveler's illness or anything medical. So we'd serve all of the guests that were coming to the other 4 camps. And that's a wide assortment of nationalities and people travel the whole world to come and surf G-Land. But of course, a lot of Aussies at one particular camp called Joyo's. And yeah, the general demographic was, quite a good surfer or a seasoned surfer, typically male. I think I was the only woman there for about 2 months, which had its own difficulties too. And then, yeah, some of the local staff that have been living there, and that was basically it.
Brilliant. And any surf-related trauma or any particular cases that stand out from your time there?
I was actually very lucky during my time. I don't know, maybe I have some angels looking after me. But yeah, I had minor cuts, minor lacerations, fin cuts, a lot of head injuries, but nothing too serious, nothing that required evacuation, nothing that required urgent imaging. But sort of 2 weeks before or after I was there were some pretty bad cases like pelvic fractures, C-spine fractures, major polytraumas that needed to be either airlifted out of there or transported by car to the nearest hospital.
Are these surfing related things? So, being pummeled against kind of coral reefs when you come off your board?
Yeah, pretty much. So sort of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, right in front of a big heavy wave. So I think one of the cases that's pretty renowned is a guy called Phil Chapman who started the Surfing Doctors, and I think he was actually there at the time. And there was a guy who had taken a board out and just done the wrong thing at the wrong time, turned around and didn't face the oncoming wave, and basically got tombstoned into the reef and landed up on the reef with pelvic fractures. I think presumed to have had a spinal fracture. I'm not sure if it was C-spine, but he bled out internally on the beach and he went into a cardiac arrest and had a full-on resuscitation with ROSC and ended up being road transferred because the helis were not available. So he was transferred to a hospital 2 hours away, and I think that he made it.
Goodness me.
He was lucky he had Phil there at the time.
Yeah, sounds it. Yeah, that's the gods were looking on him, weren't they? Were you
sure.
surfing this wave?
Not exactly. So it's definitely above my pay grade. Yeah, I surf. There's a sort of like a gentle left right up at the top of the island just before it forms these heavier breaks. And that one's called Kongs. So it actually picks up a lot of swell. It's the most exposed, but the shape of the wave is far less aggressive. It's much more mellow in size mellow in shape and much more manageable for me. And then around this sort of like a 20-minute scooter journey up on the other side of the island, there's another spot called Tiger Tracks, and I was surfing those waves. It's kind of like, it's like baby waves, and no one goes to surf those waves, but it's just not my level. And I don't know if I'll ever be at the level to surf G-Land, proper G-Land, but it was just an honor to be there and to watch people surfing it.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, sounds much more sensible spots than pelvic fracture spot. What was kind of day-to-day life like? So obviously sounds like you're on call 24/7 and lots of different pathology coming through. But where were you living? What was day-to-day life like? What were you doing? You said that you were sort of surrounded by male Aussie surfers, which must be a bit of a struggle at times.
Sure. So very, very different from Raja Ampat. So I'll crop back to Raja. So when I was staying at Raja, we were staying in little reed huts on stilts, sort of balancing in the water, and you would wake up to the sound of the GTs hunting underneath your hut, which is just incredible. Fish moving and creating movement on the stilts. And we had no running water, so everybody got 1 bucket of water per day, rainwater. But actually, I had better internet connection there than I have back home in Cape Town, so that was pretty interesting. So yeah, quite a contrast to that. So it felt like real luxury coming to East Java and being in G-Land. I had my own safari tent, like a glamping safari tent that was absolutely beautiful. Mosquito nets, 4-poster bed. So they really put me up in a beautiful accommodation and all meals included and everything. And the day-to-day was sort of wake up. I would see if there was anyone from the night before that had decided they wanted to see the doctor. And, we didn't actually have a dedicated space to see the patients. So we landed up just seeing them in the reception area, which it was a little tricky because people would kind of be checking in and there'd be blood on the floor because I've been suturing someone. So that was not ideal, but we made our way around it. And, we had a number of jump bags. And my first time there, because I went back last year as well, I spent a lot of time sorting through the inventory. So that, that was a big part of the job, was seeing what we actually had, and what we still needed to order and what our medication stakes were like. And we quickly realized a lot of the stuff had disappeared. And, as this it tends to happen in these wilderness types jobs, when you don't have continuity between team members and there's big gaps where people might not be there. And it's also subject to the elements, like monkeys coming in and grabbing boxes and running off into the jungle, which had apparently happened. And apparently someone had tucked into the ketamine stores at some point, and we didn't have no more ketamine left. So yeah, the general challenges of working in a jungle environment. But yeah, so just check on the patient, see if there's anyone from the day, and then I was allowed to go off and surf, and they made sure that was a priority too, which was really cool. And they would come and call us out of the surf, or call me out of the surf if there was someone who needed to be seen. They'd just come on the speedboat or call me from the beach, and I make my way back to see the patients.
Fascinating. I have to say, it's not often you hear that the monkey stole my medication as a excuse why we're running low on antibiotics.
Yeah, exactly.
Fascinating. And so you've been back there, and imagine there'll be lots of people listening as well as myself who'll be thinking, how do I secure this, either as a 3-month rotation, as someone sort of fully qualified and trained up like yourself, or people perhaps more junior looking at kind of electives or apprenticeships. How would one go about finding themselves there working or shadowing?
Yeah, so it's quite easy. You actually just visit their website, so surfingdoctors.com, and you'll see there Phil's emails up there, and you can chat to Dave Hately as well, who does the bookings. And yeah, through them, basically, they'll pop you on the roster if they think that you've got the right skill set. So I think they're looking for people with EM or trauma background, but they're pretty open to anyone. So if you're really keen and interested, it's still worth chatting to them and, maybe finding out if they want you to do an additional course or something before you sign up. But they will probably help to guide you. And they're definitely an inviting group of guys. Yeah, so you sign up. There's a once-off annual fee to be part of their society. And then it is a little bit tricky to try and match with their schedule, that they have a rolling roster each year, and they're kind of trying to book people in a couple months before. So you let them know your availability. And, I think often you might have to, be flexible around their schedule if there happens to be a gap for the following year. And then once they know you and they like you, you'll have a little bit more leeway to try and make times that suit you and suit your working schedule. Yeah. And then in terms of apprenticeships and like internship experiences and stuff, I actually had a student who was with me for the last time, which was really lovely. So we practiced suturing on banana peels and things before we actually sutured the patients. And yeah, it was really great. He helped me with the inventory. So they do take students, and then they match you to a doctor who's coming, and they just shadow you throughout your time. Yeah, it's very easy to do.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And we've obviously touched on some of the kind of more unusual things you've dealt with in the scorpion fishes, and you mentioned their sort of training. What if someone was looking at this, and obviously, World Extreme Medicine run a series of courses that would be great, but where would people be looking for, or what kind of training have you done that would set you up to kind of deal with some of these slightly more kind of unusual esoteric things that you may not see at all in a career before you get to one of these spots?
Yeah, that is tricky. And I definitely found that a lot of my learning happened on premises and at the time of injury. Because the scorpion fish thing, for example, was something that I never would have anticipated. So I think you have to be willing to look outside the box and to learn on the fly as well, and to look things up as you go and to ask people. There are some resources that people can tap into. So if something happens at the time, you can always phone Dan, the Divers Alert Network, and they have a lot of people that are quite well versed on hazardous marine injuries, for example. You can ask them for advice. But in terms of preparation, I mean, I think that this type of job is really well suited to people with an EM background, for one, from a trauma and emergency medicine perspective. But yeah, from a hazardous marine life perspective, I think doing as much of your own reading that you can, looking up articles, looking up journal articles. There are not many textbooks that have outlined and classified in one nice usable format a whole array of hazardous marine injuries. But yeah, so it actually leads me to some other stuff that I've been getting up to, and that's kind of what I was doing in Kenya at the end of last year. So yeah, I started my dive medicine training, which I think is something that's also, something that would help if you wanted to go work at a dive conservation project, for example. And yeah, luckily through my professor, I got offered an opportunity to set up some lecture material in hazardous marine life. Yes, I spent about 3 months setting that up and developing a lecture series for some training that I was going to do in Kenya in last year, November. So yeah, I've sort of tried to compile whatever I could find from various sources into a usable format, and it's basically 4 days worth of teaching. It covers a whole lot of things from like hazardous cone snails right up to whales. So yeah, started with marine bacteriology and went all the way up to the big stuff. And yeah, tried my best to sort of educate myself informally, but I'm by no means a marine biologist.
Fantastic. Well, might have to try and get eyes on that. That sounds brilliant. Yeah. Start small
Oh,
and work up to the biggest thing, biggest
yeah,
biggest animals on Earth.
yeah.
Brilliant. And so if you were in G-land, and your initial kind of Indonesian holiday had now turned into 6 months of work and
Yeah.
play by the sounds of it. And what did you get up to next?
Yeah, so from there, I was contemplating whether I should go home or not. And I happened to meet someone who said, well, why don't you just contact the guys at Kandui? And that's another surf resort in West Sumatra. So I thought, okay, well, let me try. Who knows? So I contacted them, and initially the answer was, no, we book up a year in advance, and we need to get to know our team, and we keep it pretty tight. And so maybe next year. So I thought, okay, well, cool. No, maybe I'll surf another week and I'll go home. And then, yeah, I got an email back from Justice Sinjin. He runs the Kandui Foundation, and he previously used to book all the doctors on their team. And he said, look, we've got a last minute cancellation. One of our doctors can't make it. Can you come and fill a 5-week gap for us? And I thought, well, this is absolutely perfect. So I left G-land and I flew up to West Sumatra, and yeah, basically started my journey at Kandui. And that's sort of been my little mini home away from home for the last 2 years. And I've done 3 stints there, probably a total accumulation of about 7 months over the last 2 years.
Fantastic. And what kind of setup is that compared to we've had clinics in receptions, bloody receptions, and glamping tents. Kind of what
Yeah.
was your setup there?
Yeah, so it's completely different. So the doctors stay with the surf guides and with the surf photographers in like a little typical Indonesian house. And it's all shared accommodation, so shared dormitory with bunk beds. It's like you're back at school camp. Shared bathroom and basically no privacy. Again, lots of male surfers around. So yeah, it definitely has its own challenges from a privacy perspective, but an absolutely beautiful environment and team to work for. So the clinic setup, I mean, our surgical table is a big wooden desk out front, and it's sort of, to treat a patient, you've got to move 4 surfboards off the desk and get the surf wax off there, and try and set up something where someone can lie down and use a rolled up towel as a pillow, so it's really makeshift. But we make do, and they have actually got quite a good supply of equipment. They've got a little like clinic cabinet, and that gets stocked by each doctor that comes. So they like to keep it within their team. So they know the doctors that are coming, and everybody contributes. So people will come from the US and they'll bring like loads of specialized wound dressings and loads of sutures, suture packs, sterile packs. And yeah, it's actually in a pretty good condition at this point.
Brilliant. And over your 7 months there, toing and froing, any particular sort of memorable cases that you've had to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. I think the ones that stand out the most are that stingray barb injury that I told you about. I think when you initially made contact. Yeah, so there was a local guy, one of the crew, who was working in the shallows, and they were cleaning some of the algae that accumulates on the sides of the boats. And he was sort of shuffling around in the shallow water, and the stingray has a reflex. If it picks up movement nearby, its tail actually automatically fires laterally or straight over the back, to sort of puncture whatever's nearby. And yeah, the barb landed up going into the side of his foot, and he was carried to me by his colleagues and sort of just dumped on the wooden table in front of the guide room. And yeah, it was quite a case. He landed up having firstly localized swelling and inflammation around the puncture site. They had actually ripped the stingray barb out of his foot before he even got to me, which yeah, in retrospect probably shouldn't have been done in that way, because the stingray barb, the structure of it is it has a whole lot of unidirectional blades that they wedge into the tissues, the soft tissues, and when you pull it out, it actually causes a lot more damage. So it's advised to actually have them surgically removed in a theater context, which may have been possible for him at a later stage. But yeah, so anyway, it was removed, and then interestingly, they'd sort of brought to me crushed spices. I think it looked like turmeric, it smelled like ginger, and it was sort of encased in some palm leaves, and they were sort of like pasting that onto the wound site. And then someone is going to fetch hot water. So interestingly, they already knew that they needed to denature these proteins, and clearly it wasn't the first time that they've dealt with an injury like that before. And I think that's something that I've definitely learned and come to appreciate is really to find an intersect where you're valuing and recognizing the ancient knowledge that a lot of the people have acquired over years. And it's maybe frowned upon by our Western standards, but to a large extent, they know a lot more than we know. And it's sometimes tricky to know what is legitimate and what can be trusted, and then when to step in with your own knowledge that you've been taught. So it's an intersect that I find interesting. But yeah, so anyway, they ripped out the barb, put this little paste on, and carried him over to me. And within about 5 minutes, he had hives all over his body. So it is urticarial rash all over his limbs and trunk, and spreading up his neck. And just as I just put up an IV for him, and I was just in the cabinet, I came back and his lips had swollen up in a matter of minutes. And he didn't have any stridor at the time, luckily, so it wasn't actually full-blown airway risk, but it was definitely anaphylaxis. Yeah, or anaphylactoid reaction. So luckily he responded to adrenaline. I gave him intravenous hydrocortisone and fluid bolus, and he was actually fine. He recovered. I watched him for about 4 hours, and then he insisted on going home. So yeah, classic Indonesian style as well. They never over dramatize anything, and they are tough as nails.
Goodness. And what's the pathophysiology of a stingray barb? I've never come across it in any of my jobs so far, being always sort of normally landlocked, it feels like. Is there a toxin as well as some of the previous things we've talked about, or is it just a physical barb?
So it is physical, but with the stingrays and with other types of rays, it actually does contain an array of different toxins. So we don't actually know. We haven't been able to study them that well. It's thought that they contain a whole lot of like proteins, and one of them, they think that they actually release a whole lot of serotonin. So they have this like serotonergic response within the body. That's one of the possible clinical manifestations. And then the other thing is that it's actually an anaphylactoid response. So it's not IgE mediated typically, but it does look a lot like typical anaphylaxis. So hives, urticaria, and the, angioedema with it, possible airway, possible hypotension, all of the classic features of an anaphylaxis.
Gosh, fascinating. All right.
Yeah.
Goodness. Well, so post various stingray incidents and lots of surfing, were you looking for something then perhaps less threatening marine life, and decided to switch onto a ship?
Yeah, so before I jump over to that, I've remembered a case that I wanted to tell you about as well. So there was an interesting case with one of the medicine men. So we had these interactions with the medicine men in the Sumatran jungle, and they would come and perform rituals and dances for the guests to kind of get an insight into the history. And we would see them once every 10 days at the turnover of guests. And their name is a sikare. That's their like traditional name. And they had come to do their dancing ceremony for us. And I was called out of the water at sunset. It was a really good session, actually. I was a bit bummed at the time. But yeah, it was definitely worth it because the patient, I was pretty sure, had an acute appendicitis. And he agreed that, okay, he won't perform his ceremony, but he'll stay overnight and he'll let me treat him intravenously. So the other part of it is, the communication out there. It's a lot of the people in the outskirts and the small islands in Indonesia don't speak Bahasa Indonesian. A lot of them have their own dialects. And I, unfortunately, am not yet fluent in Mentawai. I think I can say about 5 words in Mentawai. So it was very difficult to understand exactly what was going on. And that does play a big role in, trying to figure out clinically what's happening. For example, their word for pain is exactly the same word for illness. So they don't differentiate pain from illness. It's sakit. So everything is sakit. So it's very difficult to determine exactly what's going on. And yeah, but basically I come to the conclusion that this gentleman had acute appendicitis, and I covered him with intravenous kef and gave him IV fluids overnight and antiemetics. And in the morning, he was actually feeling a lot better. So I thought, maybe we've managed to temporize this infection. And he refused transfer to the mainland to the hospital for surgical intervention. So yeah, it was just another interesting case of an intersect, a medicine man meets a medicine woman in the jungle. And it was amazing to see him actually entrust me with care, allow me to take over care while he was ill, because he was the healer of his village. So that was quite an honor to be able to treat him. I was actually worried because I didn't see him for 2 subsequent ceremonies. But then I saw him 3 weeks later, and he was quite thin, quite pale, and he said that he had been lying in bed for quite an extended period of time. So I had wondered if he had somehow managed to seal off a perf or somehow fight off the rest of his intra-abdominal infection. But yeah, that was just another interesting jungle-specific case.
Yeah, fascinating. Again, part of the world that I don't really have much experience of, but yeah, it sounds like a really interesting intersection between, tourists coming into these places, but some really nice interaction. And it sounds like lots of these, it sounds like the tourism is quite well controlled, and there's some quite respectful interaction with the local people by the sounds of it.
Yeah, there definitely is. And there's also kind of a Robin Hood system. So a lot of the richer tourists that come pay into the foundation, and that money is used to help a lot of the local population. So if some of them need like an ophthalmic intervention or new dentistry, there's a lot of dental problems in that part of Indonesia in particular. So we would identify people and then send them over to the mainland for surgery using the money that was given and donated by some of the tourists. So yeah, it's a really good system, and I think used in a very useful and directed way, not sort of, sometimes charities, it can be, the way that funding is arranged can be misdirected, but I find that it's done in a very respectful way, and there's a lot of respect for the Mentawai culture. For example, this is just another case that I wasn't actually there for, but it did meet international news, and there was an Italian woman who was had a freak accident with a needlefish at a surf spot called Bang Bang, and she had been sitting on her board, and needlefish jump out of the water to hunt, and they have a rotating nose piece that sort of punctures their prey, and the needlefish just happened to jump exactly towards her anterior chest and pierced right into her anterior chest wall. Yeah, and she died in the surf within minutes. So either like direct myocardial injury or possibly a pneumothorax, or maybe, great vessel injury of some sort. But they had attempted resuscitation on the beach. Apparently there was actually a doctor in the surf at the time. But yeah, there was a whole amazing, tribute and ceremony to her that was done by the Mentawai people. And yeah, there was a lot of respect from people visiting. The Mentawai had asked the guests to not surf for an entire day to honor her, and that was done over a ceremony period, and people really respected that. So yeah, it's a very special place, and I think it's definitely a good interaction between the Western and the Eastern world in that part. Yeah.
Gosh, we're really racking up dangerous fishes that I've never heard of during this chat. Yeah. The needlefish, another one to avoid. And it sounds like as well that there's lots of continuity with the organization. So you've been back lots of times. It sounds like you mentioned a couple of times quite a close-knit team, and that must be quite important as well in terms of the same people going back and building relationships. Often that's something that I think certainly I struggle with. I know other people that work in some of the wilderness fields struggle with if you've got a continuously rotating group of doctors, versus perhaps a stable of more regulars. I think that's very positive for places where people start to know who you are and start to trust and respect you.
Absolutely. They've done a good job of keeping a good team, and I think they are still always looking to expand. On the odd occasion where somebody can't make it last minute, they might be looking for someone. So don't be disheartened if people are interested in signing up. Yeah, I would definitely go ahead and contact Justice.
Perfect. Once I've done some reading on needlefish, I may well do that.
Okay.
So like I said, you then headed off to work on a ship.
Yeah, so basically I came back to Cape Town, and I worked in the EDs. I was just doing locum work, trying to fill the gap, and also trying to, make up the skills decay that does happen when you're not dealing with a full array of emergencies all the time, because the volumes are a lot less in those types of environments. So yeah, I was just working on getting my skill set back up to scratch and concentrating on that. And I got a random call from an unknown number, which I usually never answer. But on this particular afternoon, I answered. It was a Thursday afternoon, and it was basically the operations manager for the SA Agulhas 2. And yeah, they said, we urgently need a doctor to join the vessel. We got your number from someone. I still don't know exactly how, but yeah, they invited me to join a voyage to the South Atlantic, leaving the following day. So I was just extremely lucky that I had not booked too many shifts that I was going to bail out of. Yeah, so we left the next day at about lunchtime, and I had to scramble, try and get my things together. I didn't even know the name of the island that they were going to at that time. They just said, oh, it's a voyage to Tristan. And I had no clue where or what Tristan da Cunha was. So I got Googling and had to scroll in and in further and further and further to finally find these South Atlantic islands. Yeah, so they're kind of halfway between South Africa and South America, right in the middle and pretty far south. And there's a whole island chain that starts with St. Helena up at the top, and there's a connected island chain that sort of ends in Tristan da Cunha. And then there's a nearby island called Gough Island. And yeah, I did a voyage with them to those two islands. And shortly after, another one to the South Indian Ocean, where we went to Marion Island and Prince Edward Island.
Gosh, I think 24 hours notice for a 4-month trip is that's pretty good going to put all your affairs into order and head out the door. And the SA Agulhas 2, what sort of ship is that? What was its role? Why were you joining the crew heading off to these places?
So it's an incredible vessel. I think it's over, I wish I knew exactly how long, over 100 meters long. And total crew is about 100. And then with guests on board, it adds up to about 150 people that you're looking after. So primarily a research vessel. So we were surrounded by SEAL scientists, bird scientists, weather guys, engineers, nuclear engineers. So there were some people studying like random nuclear explosions that happen out in the middle of the ocean, to pick up if there's any nuclear activity happening. Yeah, and lots of weather guys. But yeah, a whole array of very interesting people. So there was no shortage of good dinner time conversation. I learned a lot about seabirds, and I got in a lot of trouble for calling them seagulls from all the specialists. So yeah, it's basically a research trip. And they also do, so primarily research, but also supply of emergency equipment, and also the year's worth of supply of food, fuel, all the resources that Tristan and Goff are going to need for the year. So they do an annual trip to basically take all of their rubbish and resupply them with all of their food resources for that year.
Goodness. Am I right in thinking that Tristan is one of the most remote places on Earth because it can only be accessed by ship? It hasn't got an airstrip. Is that right?
Yeah, so it doesn't have an airstrip, but you can land a helicopter. So you can fly a heli, but there's no mainland near enough for the heli to fly from land. The heli would have to come from a vessel.
Gosh, so about as remote as you get. Gosh, and what was life like on the ship? So yeah, what was day-to-day life like?
Yeah.
Accommodation, and I always struggle to picture kind of quite what ship life is like. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've got a cute little cabin, and they actually give the doctors a lovely little unit to stay in, and luckily you have your own privacy on board. And we would run a clinic. So I would run a 2-hourly clinic in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon. And that was just at set times. So I probably have about anything between 4 to 10 patients per 2-hour slot. So busier than one would think. But I think that was because when we set sail for the first voyage, we actually set sail in the craziest storm that had hit the Cape Town coast for years. We had 10 meters of swell within the first 2 days of our voyage, and the whole ship was sort of maxed out. It was sliding, computers were sliding off desks, people were falling off their desks in meetings. All the drawers were opening up, anything that could roll was rolling around. The mobile shower heads were getting completely detached from the wall and stuff like that. So I landed up with about, I don't know, maybe half the ship needed antiemetics. And I would say probably half of them needed intramuscular, like antiemetics and anti-motion sickness medication. So that was quite intense. It was quite an intense start. But yeah, throughout the journey it was mostly an array of musculoskeletal injuries from the maintenance crew. So lots of like lumbar, lower back issues, that type of thing, pulled muscles, tendon sprains, stuff like that. And then there's also a lot of like infectious travelers stuff, because a lot of the scientists had come from the UK, that'd flown over to Cape Town. So we sort of had everybody joining the vessel within 3 days of arrival within their international travel. So it's like sort of perfect incubation period for everyone to manifest their viral illnesses that they'd picked up during their journey. And we had what was probably and most likely a COVID outbreak on the ship at the time. But, we opted not to swab. It made absolutely no sense. And we just tried to stick to reasonable isolation principles to try and prevent everybody from getting ill. But because of that, and actually because of the population on board, I landed up with quite a lot of sick patients. So we had quite a lot of asthma exacerbations on board, due to the viral bug that was sort of doing the rounds. And there's, the population of people from Tristan da Cunha seem to have quite an interesting predilection for sort of congenital heart disease. A lot of them have had congenital heart disease. A lot of them have asthma. And then they also have sort of a sudden rise in lifestyle related diseases like diabetes and hypertension. A lot of them are overweight. And I think it's probably because they are supplied with all of their needs. They really have everything that they could possibly need. And there isn't too much from a social perspective to do on the island side. I do think that, drinking does seem to be a problem. So, long story short, it did lead to patients that had quite a lot of chronic illnesses compounded with new viral infections. And that did keep me quite busy for the first couple of weeks.
I see. And are you were you then based on some of these islands for a little while as well, or was your whole time on the ship? And was the ship taking people to and from the islands?
Yeah. So yeah, that was another big part of it, was to manage the high risk operations. So that was in particular the transfers via heli to and from the ship. So just making sure that, everything was ready in case there was something helicopter related. So, the mind goes to all possible extremes, and you want to feel like you're prepared for any kind of trauma that might be associated with that. And we did do a training as well with all the staff. So had to sit down with everyone and go through helicopter extraction techniques and C-spine immobilization. And, because I might not have been able to be there, because if I was on the ship and something happened on land just after a landing, then they would need to be able to do the first steps of care. So there was quite a bit of training that was involved in that. But yeah, I spent most of my time on the vessel, and I was lucky enough to visit. So I got dropped off for like a couple of hours to go walk around and have a look at the base. And I actually spent a night on Gough Island, which was amazing. And we abseiled down. I abseiled down with one of the paramedics who was stationed there. And he took me to see a local seal colony, and we did a little hike. So I did get to do a little bit of outdoorsy stuff. Most of the time I was on board, and I would just kind of squeeze in, watching orcas, and then I'd go and see a couple patients and go work out in the gym, go see a couple more patients, that type of thing.
Sounds like a pretty decent day, as far as I'm concerned. Nice. And what's your kind of, having spent kind of most of the year on little Indonesian islands and 4 months on a ship, what's your favorite going forward?
Wow, that is so hard to say. I feel like each environment has its own perk. I think being a candidly is probably my favorite. I just think it's got the perfect balance for me in terms of the number of cases I'm seeing per day, a good inventory with good support, and some evacuation procedures already kind of established. And then also enough fun time. So a good balance of everything. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, sounds pretty good to me as well. And since you hit your kind of initial Indonesian holiday turned into, a really fascinating year. And since then, you mentioned briefly you've been in Kenya, doing dive training. What's the last year or so been like? What have you been up to?
Sure. Do you mind if, before we answer that question, sorry, do you mind if I jump back? There's just an interesting case that I had on board on SA Gullis. So obviously, so the doctor works alone. There's no paramedic or nurse. So you administer all your own meds. You have a full like an operating room that you can use. So you've got a ventilator with an anesthetic machine. You've got a surgical bed. It's by no means sterile. And then you also have a C-arm like X-ray machine and a handheld ultrasound. So but you're it. You're the one man stop. And I've never been able to do X-rays. I've never had to administer all of my own medication. So that was an enormous challenge. And also sort of like figuring out if it was just going to be me and there was really going to be something serious that happened, how was I possibly going to run an anesthetic, perform a surgery, and be an all-in-one. So that did cross my mind a lot of times, and I think I'm still not quite sure what exactly one would do. But I did have a potential airway emergency when I was on the vessel. I had a crew member who developed submental swelling, rapidly expanding submental swelling, and he was pyrexial and tachycardic. And yeah, so it was a Ludwig's angina. I was pretty sure that was most likely what it was. And luckily, he responded very well to dexamethasone and regular doses of coamoxiclav intravenously. But I definitely had some nights where I had all my intubation and cric equipment like set up and ready to go, and definitely didn't sleep very well for those 3 nights until that swelling came down. So that was just prepping for an airway emergency 4 days away from help, is the other side of wilderness medicine, I guess, in between whale watching and orca viewing.
Gosh, yeah, I think we certainly forget, or lots of people don't realize just how remote these places are. Like you say, probably too far to fly a helicopter, from the mainland, no airstrip. So, you're what I imagine several days, on the ship to get to the nearest place. And with someone pretty acute, that's a very long time, isn't it? Especially when, like you say, you're potentially doing every bit of the of the care.
Yeah, it's a little bit daunting. I mean, there was a previous case of an acute appendicitis, which landed up needing to have been operated on. So it wasn't a case that I was involved in, but I did read the case report. And there was a lady who was going into full-on septic shock, and they had no choice but to operate. And luckily, the doctor at the time was an anesthetist, and there was a vet on board and an old retired dental nurse. So yeah, the doctor performed the anesthetic, and the vet performed the surgery, and the dental nurse was the scrub nurse. And the patient, as far as I know, made it and did the appendectomy, made it back to Cape Town, and was admitted shortly after. So not my story, but an incredible story, and kudos to the doctors and professionals that were involved in that.
Yeah, gosh, there's maybe we'll have to track them down for the next podcast. There's
Yeah.
some good appendix stories out there, aren't there? There's the Russian doctor in Antarctica 100 years ago or so who operated on his own appendix with a mirror held above him, and I think passed out a few times and had a few swigs of brandy to keep his hands steady. But luckily, hopefully, our careers won't involve anything like that.
Yeah, gosh, I hope not.
Gosh, and
I've actually, yeah,
sorry.
no, I've thought of having a prophylactic appendectomy, but that's a point of contention as well.
Yeah, I think they used to do them for all the British Antarctic Survey or the various Antarctic surveys. I've heard recently, I'm not sure they still do, but that might be approach a private colorectal surgeon and see if he or she will sort that out for you.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So fascinating time on the ship, and what are you up to now? What's the future hold?
Yeah, so in the interim, I'm back home and just enjoying my time in Cape Town and getting back into full-on EC work, so emergency center stuff, which has been really enjoyable. I've found that stepping away for an extended period of time and coming back is really amazing. My sort of my empathy fatigue that starts to crop up when I'm working too long in a hospital environment is completely gone. Fully recharged from an empathy perspective, and I find I'm keen. I'm able to work. I've got energy, and I find I'm actually a much better clinician in the months when I return from trips like that. So that's been really enjoyable to feel full return of a full human emotion and excitement for my job. But yeah, so just before I came back, I went to Kenya, and that's where I was doing I did the street teaching thing. So it's through my professor at the University of Stellenbosch, and through a foundation called the Scott Haldane Foundation. It's a dive medicine sort of NGO. And yeah, they do training programs for doctors that are interested in dive medicine, and they get together once a year in a remote location and they dive. And then part of it is attending a conference and passing a test on a particular topic. So they had decided this year they wanted to do hazardous marine life, and that's why they got in touch with me to develop the course material. Yeah, so in the coming months, they've invited me to come to Amsterdam to teach them again, another group of students. So that will be in June. So I got that to look forward to. And then I don't know, I might hop on another voyage in April sometime. We'll see if there's availability, if the vessel needs me. But up until then, I'm just gonna be doing my regular EC work back home.
Brilliant. And I think you stumbled on a really important point there that increasingly I've realized with people doing slightly more different things, and even actually, so I teach on semi-regularly on World Extreme Medicine courses, and we have 4 days somewhere in the UK. Well, that's where normally the ones I teach on. There's courses around the world, but just that 4 days, you'll have people doing all sorts of coming from all sorts of positions, either running rescue vessels in the Mediterranean, or HEMS doctors from Scotland and various other places, and just that 4 days, that's normally what we all by the end of it start talking about is actually it's just that little break from the jobs, and everyone goes back feeling, like you say, kind of excited for it, excited to see patients rather than that sort of dread of, oh God, what's the next patient going to have? And I think that's really important. And you don't need to do these kind of weird and wonderful exotic jobs full time or forever, but splicing them into a career actually means that, yeah, I'm a big believer that you're a far, far better doctor or nurse or paramedic or healthcare professional by doing these things because you appreciate what you've got. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said at the end there, it definitely makes you appreciate the resources that you have and the readily available specialists that you can consult and the boss that you can ask for a second opinion. And you know, all of that often falls away in those contexts. And it just gives you a newfound appreciation for what you maybe took for granted before you left. So that's another layer of appreciation that one gets that I've definitely experienced. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always very nice to have a hospital pharmacy around the corner rather than a pharmacy 4 hours down a dirt track, which is, you know, flooded.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
exactly.
So I think you touched on some fascinating things that you've done, and there'll be lots of people listening who are either early in their careers or well into a career and
Mm.
would love to get involved. Any advice for those people, either thinking of following your path or taking some time to do something a bit more unusual?
Sure. I mean, I think there's a good argument to say take risks, you know, within a reasonable framework. And I think to be willing to step away from something that seems like a safety net for the opportunity of something rare, I've found it to be the best way to get these opportunities is to say, okay, well, you know, leaving this job, leaving this secure employment, you know, does actually put me at a reasonable amount of risk, but if I do, it frees up my time and then I can really focus on attaining opportunities. I think being willing to take risks to a certain extent, to be able to step away from full-time employments, that you can take these jobs when they crop up. And then I would say just, you know, putting your name in the hat for future opportunities. So sending out random emails. I mean, how I got the barefoot conservation thing, I literally just put in dive master, Dr. Raja Ampat, you know, and then it popped up. So just, you know, sifting through the internet for opportunities. And I think talking to people, networking, and obviously through, you know, this wonderful platform that you guys have developed, this is such a great way for people to connect and to find other opportunities that they never knew were possible. Yeah, so talking to people, networking, being willing to take risks. And I would say to not listen to people whose futures don't look like what you would like yours to look like. So, you know, somebody said that to me, or I read that quote, and it really stuck with me that you shouldn't take advice from someone if you don't like the way that their situation has turned out necessarily, or that's not what you want for your future. Because I think it's very easy in our careers to get forced into a path, you know, the linear path of, you know, going through the rungs to specialization and becoming a consultant and then, you know, working as a consultant and just going from A to B. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. But there is so much more available if you start to look laterally and you look sideways at things that you never would have thought were possible. And to start talking to people about the things that you love. And then somehow you kind of magnetize those people into your life and opportunities are offered in ways you never really thought was possible.
Brilliant. I think that's very, very, that's a great quote and a great sort of thought to live by, is exactly like, if you don't want to be doing what that person's doing, then perhaps their advice isn't worth following to the letter. And yeah, I think, the WEM, community and is absolutely, I love it for that, you're meeting people that are doing things which just, make me feel boring and give me ideas. And as I sort of mentioned offline before, yeah, that's part of the appeal of hosting the podcast, is I get to speak to interesting people that have done fascinating stuff. And I keep a little list on my computer of all the things that I want to then look up and squeeze into the coming years. Um,
Yeah.
so on the topic of community, if people kind of want to reach out for some advice or ideas from yourself, is there any way they can do so?
Yeah, sure. They're welcome to drop me an email. But I am particularly bad with my emails, I must say. So I'm probably more likely to respond to an Instagram message. So yeah, they can follow me or drop me an email. It's probably best.
Perfect. Well, we can pop those in the show notes, perhaps. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to finally catch up after what's been, like I say, a year or so. And hopefully, like I said, I'm heading over to Cape Town in April, so perhaps we can actually meet up in person.
No, that would be wonderful. We can go for a hike or something. I can take you to a wine farm.
Ah, dreamy. Hiking to wine sounds absolutely perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time, Gemma. And I'm sure you've got some fantastic things to look forward to over the next kind of couple of years. And perhaps I'll have to get you back on the podcast to hear about those in due course.
Thank you so much. Thanks for all your time. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to following the podcast and hearing the next exciting stories that are to follow.
Thanks for listening to the episode. Please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to. Please also head over to the World Extreme Medicine website, where you can find more engaging content on extreme medicine webinars and indeed the collection of courses from our global network, including humanitarian, disaster relief, expedition, space, military, tactical, and performance medicine. Thanks again.